Hey guys, tonight we're peeling back the gold mask of ancient Egypt. And trust me, what's underneath isn't divine. Because tonight you're going to see what your life would actually be like as an Egyptian pharaoh. If you enjoy snoozing to the sound of historical suffering, I'd love it if you gave this a like or even subscribed. It helps more than sacred incense ever did. And I'm always curious where you're listening from, so drop a comment with your city and the time it is there. I love seeing where our sleepy little empire is tuning in from. Now, settle in, dim the lights, maybe let a candle flicker nearby, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Because tonight, you're not just learning about ancient Egyptian pharaohs, you're living every uncomfortable second of it. Sleep is supposed to be sacred in ancient Egypt, a time to commune with the gods, to dream messages from the divine, to let your body recover beneath the sacred ceiling of stars painted onto your chamber walls. But in practice, sleep as pharaoh is mostly about trying not to suffocate beneath your own bedding. The palace is built from stone, sandstone, limestone, occasionally imported granite if the treasure is feeling arrogant. And while it looks beautiful in the daylight, all those walls soak up heat like a festival bread sponge and release it slowly throughout the night. Even the floor sweats. You're supposed to feel divine. Instead, you feel like a roasted duck wrapped in damp linen. There's no airflow. There are no windows that open. Air circulation is a foreign concept to engineers who are more concerned with aligning buildings to the stars than designing anything breathable. So you lie flat on a palm fibre mattress, stuffed with crushed reeds and sacred discomfort, your back stuck to the sheet, your legs tangled in ceremonial fabric that feels more like a net than a blanket. Even the walls are painted with scenes of the afterlife, as if mocking the fact that you won't be escaping this world anytime soon. You can't toss or turn. The pharaoh must rise in a regal state, and waking up tangled in sweat-soaked cloth with a pillow that smells faintly of river mould is not part of that image. The pillow, by the way, is made of stone, a headrest technically, curved, elevated, cool to the touch when you first lie down on it. But after hours of pressed contact and no ventilation, it feels like resting your skull on the belly of the sun god himself. The ancient Egyptians believed the head needed to be lifted during sleep to keep evil spirits from entering through the mouth. What it actually keeps out is comfort. You try to sleep. You do. But your body keeps reminding you that it's covered in wax, oils, and sacred ointments meant to make you smell like a god. In reality, they create a slick outer layer that traps heat and ensures that every part of you sticks to everything else. The wig you wear during ceremonies has left behind a halo of wax on your scalp. Your eyebrows are still faintly itchy from the coal that was smeared across your lids 12 hours ago. The ceremonial collar you wore earlier today left an imprint in your collarbone that feels strangely permanent. You think about water, not drinking it, just the idea of it. But even that is rationed, regulated, and blessed. You cannot simply gulp from a cup. Water is brought in jars, poured for you by servants, stored in clay sealed with wax, and filtered only by the hope that it has not been sitting out long enough to sprout something divine. You're supposed to wake just before sunrise, not by your own will, but by the gentle shuffling of sandaled feet and the low breath of incense. But you're already awake. You've been awake for hours. Sleep comes in fits, not dreams, just pauses. The kind of half-sleep you get when you're too hot to rest but too exhausted to resist. Occasionally you slip into a brief moment of unconsciousness, only to be snapped awake by a mosquito, or a beetle, or the faint sound of a servant coughing politely outside the room, as if asking permission to exist. Even in your most vulnerable hours, you're not alone. There are guards, there are priests, there are chamber attendants trained to remain utterly silent while they watch over you, just in case your soul decides to leave your body prematurely and they need to notify someone. They stand in the shadows, blending into the columns, watching over a ruler who hasn't blinked in minutes. It's comforting in the same way that sleeping with your eyes open is comforting. When sunlight finally spills across the horizon, it does not bring relief. It brings responsibility. You're helped out of bed, not because you are weak, but because gods do not simply rise. They are raised. draped in linen that's already too warm, washed with water fetched from the Nile at dawn, bathed in natron and scrubbed with cloth rougher than you'd like to admit. Sacred oils are rubbed into your skin. Myrrh, frankincense, cedar. They all smell rich, and together they create a cloud of scented humidity that never really leaves your body. You sweat through it by breakfast. Speaking of which, the heat has already spoiled part of the morning's offering. A plate of figs is swarmed by flies. The beer is warm, thick, and slightly sour. You're told this is normal, that this is the sacred taste of tradition. You chew a hunk of bread and feel your molars beg for mercy. Dental care, even for a god king, is limited. Cavities are common. Groundstone in the flour does that. Tiny grit particles from grinding grain on stone slabs get baked right into the bread. It is essentially ancient sandpaper for your gums. You once had a tooth pulled during a religious fast, and were not allowed to cry out because it would disrupt the alignment of the ritual calendar. You nod politely as a priest blesses your barley. Outside your chamber, servants sweep the sand out of the courtyards again. It will be back in minutes. There is no such thing as a clean floor in a place where the wind moves like an offended spirit. The sun is already high enough to glare off the whitewashed walls, creating a kind of visual heat that stings your eyes and makes it impossible to focus on anything except the thought of being horizontal again. But sleep is now hours away, and it will not be peaceful, it will not be cool, it will not be silent. You are a pharaoh. You sleep under painted ceilings surrounded by gold, watched by stone gods, and yet, every night, your body melts into your sheets like a sacred offering to discomfort. You rule the world, and you still can't get 8 hours. There are no mirrors in the palace that show you as you are. Only polished copper or burnished bronze, reflecting a warped, glowing version of yourself through a haze of sweat and ceremony. And yet, each morning, you're expected to appear flawless, hairless, fragrant, shining with the oily glow of divine hygiene. The illusion of perfection takes hours. The process is not comforting. It is meticulous, painful, and slightly absurd. Every inch of your body must be shaved, not just your head, not just your face. Your chest, your arms, your legs, even your armpits are scraped clean with a sharpened bronze razor that has never once seen the concept of sharpening stones. Shaving is done dry, because lather is a luxury. So instead you're scrubbed with natron first, a naturally occurring mix of sodium carbonate and baking soda, which irritates the skin and leaves you dusted like a pastry before someone takes a blade to your limbs with religious intensity. Hair, in the eyes of the divine, is impure. The gods do not sweat. The gods do not grow leg hair. Therefore neither can you. This is how you begin the day. There are no soaps in the modern sense. The cleansing agents used are often mixed from lion fat, sometimes beef tallow, sometimes crocodile, and occasionally floral oil if you're lucky enough to be favoured that morning. You're scrubbed with linen cloths so coarse they might be mistaken for punishment tools. And once your outer layer of skin has been polished to the god's satisfaction, it's time to anoint you. Not with something light, not something breathable. You're embalmed in life, thick oils, fragrant salves, a paste made from crushed lotus petals and honey. You smell like a bouquet dipped in tree sap. It coats your neck, your arms, your chest. It stains the linens around your waist and glistens in the folds of your elbow. It is divine, it is sticky, and it will remain on your body for the next several hours as you try to navigate a climate designed for lizards. The wig is not optional. You're never seen with your actual scalp exposed in public. Even in the innermost sanctums, your head must appear crowned. The royal wig is heavy, braided human hair mixed with sheep wool and plant fibre. It is lined with beeswax to hold its shape, and perfumed with myrrh or sandalwood to hide the fact that it smells mostly like whatever it was stored in. When it's placed on your head, it seals in the heat like a tomb lid. The temples sweat first, then the neck, then the top of your head starts to itch, but you cannot scratch. You are divine, you are flawless, you are suffering silently for the sake of ritual. Your eyes are lined next. Thick kohl made from soot or powdered galena is applied in wide bands stretching out toward your temples. This is not for beauty. It is protection. From evil spirits, from sun glare, from insects, from the judgment of other priests. It crusts at the corners of your eyes and flakes into your eyelashes when the heat dries it too quickly. But it is necessary. Even babies in noble houses are lined with kohl. The sacred raccoon look is part of your state identity now. You're painted with ochre, a red powder made from iron oxide, sometimes mixed with fat or resin, and smeared across your chest and arms to simulate the healthy tone of vitality. It is symbolic. It is decorative. It is also mildly abrasive and absolutely stains everything. Your linens will have to be burned at the end of the week. They always are. Sacred laundry is not something that can be entrusted to washing. It is ritually destroyed. Which is good, because no amount of scrubbing will remove the mixture of body oil, sweat, ochre dust and beetle wing fragments that now cling to your daily garments. You chew lotus petals for breath, not because they work, but because it's tradition. Your actual breath smells faintly of sour beer, onions and dried fish. Everyone's does. The climate does not lend itself to mint or any other civilized herb. You once tried chewing a small handful of imported resin to mask the smell. It welded your back molars together for 4 hours. The priest declared it a divine message. You declared it a mistake. There are dedicated grooming attendants, of course, trained from childhood to scrape, polish and perfume the body of a living god. They do not speak to you. They do not look you in the eye. They simply anoint, file, and smooth whatever surface of you has become too mortal. Your nails are cleaned with tools shaped like tiny sickles. Your ears are swabbed with reeds dipped in honeyed oil. Your feet are scraped with flint and washed in basins filled with scented water that has already been used by 3 other high officials and 1 temple cat. There is no fresh water. There is only water that has not yet disappointed someone. Even your sweat is political. You're not allowed to sweat like a mortal. Your robes must be changed several times a day to maintain the illusion that the sun does not offend you. When a sweat stain appears near your ribs, it is declared symbolic. When it appears under your arms, it is declared an omen. When your legs begin sticking together during an audience, a priest quietly recommends walking with slightly more sacred purpose. Your sandals chafe. They're made of papyrus or leather, sometimes both, and offer all the support of wet cardboard. You're expected to glide, not shuffle. But after a day of standing motionless during ceremonies, your heels ache and your arches feel like they've been pressed into stone by Ra himself. Your royal toenails are painted with a copper pigment mixed with resin. They chip by midday. A servant repaints them. You nod. This is fine. The people believe you're untouched by the filth of the world, that the river does not splash you, that the flies avoid your skin, that your hair does not grow and your body does not itch and your feet never smell like the inside of a sandal warehouse. But the truth is that you are deeply, constantly human, sweaty, sticky, slightly burned, and always being stared at by a small army of people who will report, in great detail, whether or not your fingernail cuticles appeared adequately waxed during this morning's sun invocation. There are days when you fantasize about being a farmer, not for the work, but for the privacy, to sweat without consequence, to stink without symbolism, to wake up without someone chanting at your footboard about the purification of your soul. But that is not your life. Your life is being shaved until your skin flakes. Your life is being oiled until your robes stick to your thighs. Your life is pretending not to notice that your ceremonial perfume smells like heated raisins soaked in goat grease. Tomorrow it will begin again, and no matter how many jars of fragrant salve they smear onto your armpits, it will never stop being hot. It will never stop being itchy. It will never stop being you. Your digestive system was not consulted when your role was created. As Pharaoh, you are worshipped, decorated, shaved, polished, and perfumed. But the one thing you cannot do in peace is eat. Meals are sacred performances. Everything that enters your mouth must be blessed, measured, presented, and consumed with the grace of someone who has never once burped in public. Which is unfortunate, because most of what you eat would make a goat reconsider its options. Bread is your staple, flat, round, and baked in clay moulds that are never quite clean. Over time, grit from the grinding stones accumulates in the flour. It is microscopic, constant, and deeply committed to destroying your teeth. Archaeologists have found pharaohs with ground-down molars, exposed roots, and dental abscesses so advanced it's a wonder anyone survived a week without screaming. But you cannot scream. You chew politely. You swallow solemnly. You pretend that the wetness in your eyes is divine revelation, not the result of biting down on a pebble. Beer accompanies nearly every meal. It is thick, unfiltered, and resembles soup more than a drink. It contains grains, foam, floating sediment, and the occasional unlucky fly. It is warm, slightly sour, and always offered with great ceremony. You lift the cup with both hands, you sip. You try not to gag. Your attendants beam with pride. They have just served you the nectar of the Nile. You consider naming one of them High Priest of Fermented Regret. Protein, when available, comes in the form of fish, fowl, or dried meat. These are gifts from the gods, and like many divine gifts, they come wrapped in complications. Fish are often sun-dried in open air, salted and rehydrated before consumption. The salt content alone could mummify your liver. Chickens did not exist in Egypt until the late period, so your poultry options are limited to goose, duck, or pigeon. All are cooked over open fires and seasoned with whatever happens to be nearby, which is usually leeks or garlic. You eat a roasted duck leg and feel your stomach lurch. Vegetables are safer, usually. Onions, leeks, and radishes are common. They are grown in Nile-rich soil and harvested by hand. They taste earthy. They crunch with the satisfaction of not containing gravel. But they are often served raw, in quantity, which means that by the time your meal is done, you're not only sweating under your ceremonial collar, you're digesting a volatile combination of barley, salted goose, fermented wheat sludge, and 3 different root vegetables that all act as natural laxatives. You cannot leave the table. You must sit and receive offerings. You must nod as priests interpret the cloud pattern in your tea steam. You must smile as dancers perform the sacred mime of seasonal abundance. You feel a rumble. You regret the radishes. There is no privacy for pharaohs. Not during bathing, not during dressing, not even during digestion. If your stomach growls during a public ritual, it is interpreted as divine hunger. If it growls again, it becomes divine anger. If you clutch your side and excuse yourself mid-audience, a scribe records the exact moment, so the astrologers can determine whether Mars is now retrograde in the house of discomfort. You're not allowed to express dissatisfaction with food. Doing so is seen as disrespect toward the gods, who have clearly provided this roasted pigeon as a message of fertility and seasonal harmony. You once refused a honey cake during a festival and triggered a 3-day purification ceremony involving lotus petals, goat urine, and several very enthusiastic priests. You eat what is given, even when it has clearly been given too long ago. Desserts exist, sort of. Honey is the main sweetener in ancient Egypt. It is used sparingly, gathered by hand, and stored in sealed clay jars that are only opened for offerings or ceremonies. You're occasionally given figs or dates, dried to the consistency of leather, and filled with seeds that wait silently in your teeth for the perfect moment to crack a molar. You chew carefully. You nod appreciatively. You pretend that your jaw is not currently pulsing with the rage of 3,000 years of bad dentistry. Sometimes food is offered richly but never eaten. Dozens of loaves, jars, cakes, and roasted animals are placed before you during festivals, then removed by servants to be distributed elsewhere. It is a pageant of plenty, a performance of excess. You sit surrounded by more food than most of your citizens will see in a month, and yet your stomach grumbles. Not because you are hungry, but because you just ate a dried fish that may have died of natural causes before it was ever cooked. By nightfall, Your digestion is in open rebellion. You're not allowed to clutch your stomach in public, so instead you sit stiffly on your throne, watching a procession of dancers wave lotus blossoms at you in the moonlight while your internal organs conduct their own ritual. You're offered a sip of beer. You smile faintly. You wish instead for water, clear, cold, real. But the Nile is filled with gods, silt, crocodiles, and regret. The palace stores its drinking water in jars lined with pitch or wax, and even those smell faintly like damp reeds in the bottom of a clay boot. You drink, you sigh, you wait for the cramps to pass. They do not. Tomorrow you will eat again. Bread with grit, beer with chunks, goose with bone shards, radishes that fight back. You will chew with aching teeth, smile through intestinal distress, and nod as priests bless your meal with the confidence of men who have never once eaten a hot, greasy duck leg under direct sunlight while wearing 40 pounds of gold. You are Pharaoh, the gods feed you, and your stomach is constantly plotting its revenge. You do not rule Egypt from a throne, you rule it from a schedule. One so long and impossibly ceremonial it feels less like a calendar and more like a punishment invented by a priest who had too much free time and access to papyrus. Being Pharaoh is not about issuing royal decrees or casually raising a brow while someone fans you with ostrich feathers. It is about attending temple ceremonies. All of them. Always. Forever. Until the day you are mummified, and then symbolically expected to attend even more. There are over 2,000 known deities in ancient Egypt. Some are major, some are minor, some are just animals in fancy hats. All demand attention. Each has their own rituals, feast days, seasonal offerings, statues to be cleansed, incense to be burned, and sacred chants to be recited in a language that was old when your grandfather was still being swaddled in goat linen. And you, the living embodiment of Horus on earth, are expected to oversee all of it with serene, unflinching authority, while your sandals slowly weld to the temple floor. The day begins in the temple of Amun, or Ra, or Thoth. It depends on the season, the stars, the river level, and the local priesthood's latest political manoeuvring. You arrive before sunrise, not for drama, for purification. The temple must be awakened, washed, perfumed, and you must be there to nod silently while a chorus of men in leopard skin sashes bathes a stone statue in milk and honey while singing about cosmic cows. The statue is then dried, dressed, fed, and kissed by a priest wearing enough eyeliner to survive a solar eclipse. You're not allowed to sit. You're not allowed to blink too often. You're not allowed to question why a statue of a falcon-headed god is being offered bread shaped like lotus blossoms. You simply stand, divine, motionless, staring into the incense haze while flies explore your wig and your knees begin to tremble from divine fatigue. Offerings are endless. Baskets of bread, bunches of grapes, jars of beer, barley, figures, onions, cut flowers, burned herbs, bronze mirrors, carved amulets, scented oils, and the occasional goose that was very much alive 15 minutes ago. All are presented to the gods with great reverence. All are then removed by priests who discreetly store the bounty in temple kitchens where it is redistributed, eaten, or offered again the next day in a slightly different configuration. Nothing goes to waste except your time. Temples are not peaceful sanctuaries. They are bureaucratic factories. Each one employs hundreds of workers, gardeners, bakers, stonecutters, scribes, dancers, musicians, animal handlers, and more priests than there are flies in your throne room. You're expected to oversee temple repairs, approve mural commissions, inspect storage jars, sign off on building expansions, and pretend to be extremely spiritually moved by a room full of scribes arguing over the proper shape of an offering loaf for the solstice of Bastet. The rituals continue through the afternoon. At the Temple of Khnum, you witness the ceremonial shaping of a symbolic clay human on a sacred potter's wheel. It represents the formation of life, or something. You nod. You're handed a small clay figure. You hand it to a priest. It is placed in a bowl. Then a goat is blessed and everyone claps. You do not know why. You smile politely. Every major city has its own temple complex. Thebes, Memphis, Heliopolis, Abydos. They're all enormous. They're all sacred. And they all expect your personal attention at least once per season. This means travel. Endless river journeys on ceremonial barges draped in gold and lined with uncomfortable cushions. You glide through the Nile's current surrounded by musicians who play harps, while you try not to think about how the river smells like fermented mud and crocodile breath. You wave to farmers, you wave to priests, you wave to statues of yourself that line the banks like reminders that you will never be alone again. Temple festivals are the worst. They are long, they are loud, they are hot. You ride in a litter carried by 20 men who chant as they walk. The crowd throws flowers, some throw onions, one throws a sacred ibis feather that sticks to your lip for the duration of the fertility hymn. You're supposed to look regal. Instead, you look mildly startled and slightly overcooked. During the Feast of Upet, you're carried from Karnak to Luxor while thousands of priests march, chant, burn incense, and occasionally stop to recite hymns that last longer than most of your meals. Statues of the gods are paraded beside you. Sacred barks rock in the heat. Children scream. Animals panic. Somewhere in the distance, a scribe is documenting whether or not your left eye twitched during the second chorus. You're required to fast before certain ceremonies, then feast afterward, then fast again. This cycle continues until your digestive system files for divine compensation. You consume symbolic meals with names like the Sacred Loaf of Renewal and the Divine Leek of Restoration. You chew with reverence. You swallow with dread. Priests are politically powerful. Offend one and you risk a plague, or worse, a scandal. There are rumours of temple factions that sabotage rival ceremonies, spilled oil, crooked incense burners, rewritten hymns. You once stood in a temple courtyard while two high priests debated whether your ceremonial wig had the proper number of beeswax curls to honour Hathor. You considered walking into the Nile and letting it decide your fate. By nightfall, your eyes burn from smoke, your throat itches from chanting, your shoulders ache from holding ritual poses. You smell like myrrh, goat grease, and worry. You return to the palace only to discover that a priest from the crocodile cult has arrived with an urgent omen and 3 scrolls full of sacred geometry. You nod. You accept the scrolls. You light a ceremonial candle and pretend to read while your ears ring with the sound of temple bells that have been tolling since dawn. You are Pharaoh. You're the son of gods. You're also deeply exhausted. There are 47 more religious obligations this week alone, and none of them involve rest. Being Pharaoh means trusting absolutely no one, especially the people who bow the lowest. Every servant who pours your wine might be praying to see you foam at the mouth. Every official who praises your wisdom might be trying to nudge your name off a monument with a chisel. And every cup of honeyed beer you sip during a ceremony might be spiced with something less sacred than cinnamon. Ancient Egypt loved poisons, not the flashy theatrical kind, the slow kind, the ones that made you feel a little off for weeks until your organs quietly gave up. Venoms from snakes, extracts from toxic plants, powdered minerals scraped from rocks the priests refused to touch barehanded. There are recipes tucked inside old scrolls that read more like polite suggestions for personal vengeance than medical guidelines. Pharaohs had food testers, wine tasters, scented oils that were applied by someone else first just in case. A minor rash on the wrist of a royal attendant could cause a full-blown court panic and the immediate exile of 2 perfume mixers and a scroll reader. One pharaoh is said to have rotated his dinnerware every week to prevent any predictable routine. Another kept 5 identical beds and never slept in the same 1-2 nights in a row. Paranoia was not a flaw. It was a survival strategy. You're surrounded by scribes. They record everything. Your words, your gestures, the number of steps you took during a temple procession, and whether or not your right sandal made an unplanned squeak. They are the engine of the state. They're also the gossip machine of the century. You once sneezed during an audience, and the next day half the palace was whispering about your spiritual weakness and whether it might be time to consult a new astrologer. You have ministers, viziers, overseers of grain, overseers of river traffic, overseers of linen storage, overseers of other overseers. The bureaucracy is endless, and every layer is a potential leak. Your messages are copied, your meetings recorded, and any offhand comment about someone's beard being less symmetrical than usual could be reported as a divine insult requiring immediate compensation in the form of livestock or ritual apology. Plotting is never done openly. It is done through temple donations, through marriage arrangements, through mysteriously delayed shipments of cedar from Byblos. You notice when your favourite scribe stops attending morning briefings. You notice when your sandals are placed differently at the base of your ceremonial bed. You notice when 3 different priests tell you that your dreams about crocodiles are a blessing rather than a warning. To appear weak is dangerous. To appear too strong is also dangerous. You must appear divine, unflinching, omniscient. Which is difficult when your advisors are actively trying to outguess each other about which way you will tilt your head during the next harvest festival. There are layers of meaning to everything you do, and behind every interpretation is someone waiting to benefit from a mistake. The walls of your palace are painted with scenes of eternal victory, rows of kneeling prisoners, offerings from foreign lands, rows of scribes recording your generosity while gods nod approvingly. None of them show the constant tension of being admired and loathed at the same time. There are no murals of backroom deals, no hieroglyphs depicting bribes disguised as temple donations, no painted scenes of that one grain official who keeps accidentally redirecting shipments during festival season. You consult oracles, not because you believe them, but because everyone else does. A favourable omen can buy you 3 weeks of stability. A bad omen can start a drought rumour faster than the Nile can flood. You once sacrificed a sacred bull just to stop a rumour that your left foot was cursed. It was not cursed. It was swollen from ceremonial sandal straps that had been tied too tightly by an apprentice priest trying to impress a girl. Everyone smiles at you. The courtiers, the priests, the cooks, the guards, the stone carvers who etch your likeness into the sides of temples with the same chisel they use to clean their fingernails. They all smile, but you are the Pharaoh. You know how the smiles work. You issue a new tax on incense. Suddenly your dreams are interpreted as troubling. You pardon a group of temple thieves. Suddenly the crocodile priests begin fasting for your spiritual clarity. You commission a new obelisk. The chief architect kisses your feet and then quietly petitions for your cousin to be reassigned to a distant garrison, where the sandstorms are known to take names. You sleep surrounded by guards, 2 outside the chamber, 2 inside the outer corridor, a 5th who stands in the room pretending to be a statue. You're not allowed to speak to them. You're not allowed to acknowledge their presence, but you hear them breathe, you hear them shift, and you wonder how many of them were placed by the high priest rather than your own command. No one ever tries to kill you directly. That would be unspeakable. It is always symbolic. A prayer said backward, a statue slightly misaligned, an offering placed upside down. These are warnings, messages, threats dressed as ritual mishaps. You once found your name misspelled on a temple relief. You had the priest exiled. The misspelling remained. You pretended not to see it. Everyone knew you had seen it. You are the living god. You are the Eye of Ra. You're also the only person in the palace who cannot trust a single smile to be sincere. Every compliment might be a trap. Every offering might be a test. Every piece of advice might be exactly what someone else needs you to believe. You once confided in a servant about your toothache. The next morning an herbalist appeared with a scroll of remedies. He was not summoned. He was not allowed inside. But somehow he knew. You drank the potion. Your toothache vanished. So did the servant. So did the herbalist. You never asked questions. You just added another food taster and started using a different pillow. You are Pharaoh. Your name is carved into the bones of Egypt, and everyone around you is holding a chisel. You are not an architect. But no one can know that. You are the Pharaoh, which means every pillar, obelisk and mud brick tower built under your rule must be publicly credited to your divine vision, even though you once approved a floor plan upside down because the papyrus was smudged with fish grease. Egypt builds constantly. Obelisks, temples, shrines, tombs, walls that encase other walls, walls that exist purely to honour the decorative value of adjacent walls. Your monuments are declarations of divine order carved into the horizon. They're also logistically catastrophic. A single obelisk can weigh over 300 tons, carved from a solid block of granite that must be dragged from a quarry hundreds of miles away. It is shaped with nothing but copper tools, persistence, and spiritual delusion. The stonemasons sleep at the site. They chip away for months. They chant as they work. Occasionally someone faints. You're told this is an offering. You nod. You're expected to inspect these projects. Personally, regularly, in the heat. Surrounded by overseers who recite progress updates using phrases like blessed yield and lunar compliant alignment. You smile while sweat pools in your sandals, and your eyebrows sting from the salt crust forming beneath your wig. You're handed a ceremonial chisel and invited to symbolically strike the granite. You do. It makes a hollow clink. Everyone cheers like the gods just wept. The quarries of Aswan echo with picks. Workers are fed beer and onions. Some of them are shackled to prevent unauthorized divine reflection. You're told this is efficient. You're also told they're deeply honored to work on your tomb while you're still alive. You choose to believe this because the alternative is deeply awkward. Transportation is its own form of absurdity. Stones are dragged by teams of workers across greased logs and wet sand. Sometimes entire sleds are floated down the Nile during flood season. You're told this is symbolic. It is also wet and slow and prone to sinking. You once watched an entire statue of yourself disappear beneath the current, while a priest muttered something about rebirth, and then immediately changed the subject. When the stones arrive, the builders get to work. Ramps are built, then removed, then rebuilt differently, then changed again when someone realizes the sun's angle will cast a shadow in the wrong direction. During the winter solstice goat procession, you're handed diagrams. They're mostly squiggles. You nod solemnly and say, yes, this honours Ra. Everyone agrees. The squiggles are now sacred. The temples themselves are nightmares of divine proportion. Hyperstyle halls, pylons, inner sanctums, sacred lakes, reflecting pools, processional roads lined with ram-headed sphinxes that must all face the same direction, or the gods will take offence. You're expected to walk the length of these roads barefoot in silence, while everyone else plays flutes. You trip once. A child is blamed. The child becomes a potter. There are storage rooms within storage rooms, chambers for sacred oils, scroll archives, bread loaves carved in stone for symbolic feasts, statues of gods so heavy they are moved only once per century and only after fasting. You're asked to bless a wall before it is painted. You touch the plaster, it collapses. This is interpreted as a sign of cosmic transformation. You're led away quietly and offered a pomegranate. Your tomb is always under construction. Always. It begins the moment you ascend the throne and continues until the moment you fail to wake up from your final purification nap. The tomb is deep, carved into limestone cliffs, filled with traps, fake passages, endless symbols, ceilings painted with stars, walls covered in scenes of you offering the same loaf of bread to 15 different gods in slightly different poses. You approve sarcophagus designs. You examine canopic jars. One has a baboon head, another has a falcon. You're told these represent your internal organs. You ask if it matters which jar gets which part. The priests do not answer. You're handed a stylus and asked to sign off on the royal liver layout. Every relief must be reviewed. Artists present sketches on plaster panels. You examine each one. You're always larger than everyone else. This is not artistic license. This is divine regulation. The Pharaoh must be massive. The enemy must be tiny. The gods must be exactly your height, or just slightly taller depending on the lunar cycle. You approve a scene of yourself smiting enemies. You ask what kingdom they represent. You're told they are generic. You nod. Colour is a language. Red for life, green for rebirth, yellow for the sun, blue for the gods, all made from crushed minerals mixed with animal fat and applied with reeds. You're shown a wall that took 3 months to paint. You say it needs more green. The artist weeps. This is considered a blessing. At night, your dreams are filled with scaffolding. You see bricks stacked in impossible formations. You wake up mid-recitation of a construction prayer. A servant records it. A temple is built to honour your spiritual insight. You later discover it is being used to store excess jars of sacred onion balm. You visit monuments from previous reigns, each ruler trying to outbuild the last. Some are beautiful, some are collapsing, some have your name carved into them even though you did not commission them. You're told this is normal. You're also told that removing your predecessor's name and replacing it with your own is tradition. You do not argue. You once asked how many temples were dedicated to you. The scribe returned 3 days later with a list that included 16 duplicates and one entry for a ceremonial mud oven that accidentally hardened into a vaguely human shape. You considered deleting it. You were advised not to. It is now considered sacred. Children leave beans there during solstice. You are Pharaoh. You are the architect of divine space. And most days you have no idea what you just approved. But it is beautiful. It is massive. And it has your name on it, carved into stone, repeated 1,000 times, in case the gods forget who to blame. Somewhere in your palace courtyard, a goose is being serenaded by a priest with a harp. This is not a hallucination. This is protocol. Because the goose, for reasons that no one will explain clearly, has been designated sacred to Geb, god of the earth, and therefore must be lulled into a meditative state before the afternoon feeding. It hisses in perfect rhythm with the music. The priest looks pleased. You quietly reconsider the trajectory of your life. Sacred animals are everywhere. They are worshipped, protected, doted upon, and often held in higher regard than many government officials. Cats are honoured as manifestations of Bastet. Crocodiles are living extensions of Sobek. Baboons serve Thoth. Bulls channel Apis. Even certain species of fish are considered divine, which makes eating dinner feel like a cautious theological debate. Cats roam freely. They live in the palace, the temples, the kitchens, and the archives. They are brushed, perfumed, given offerings. Some even wear small decorative collars woven from dyed reeds and lined with miniature bells that tinkle ominously whenever they leap onto a scroll shelf. Accidentally stepping on a cattail is not an offence against nature. It is blasphemy. A mistake punishable by days of ceremonial fasting, and at least one very awkward apology to a priest holding a bronze statue shaped like a smiling feline. Sobek's crocodiles are more demanding. They are fed by hand. They lounge in temple pools and are anointed with sacred oils during flood season. When one dies, it is mummified, wrapped in linen, and buried in a sarcophagus with more dignity than most foreign ambassadors. You once slipped near a temple pond and found yourself eye to eye with a crocodile wearing a beaded necklace. It blinked slowly. The priest called it an omen of cosmic renewal. You called it terrifying. Baboons present another set of complications. Kept at certain temples of Thoth, they are trained to mimic ceremonial gestures. They sit during rituals, they clap, they occasionally throw things. They are considered wise, divine, and extremely temperamental. You're expected to pretend they are participating in the elevation of the sacred word. You're also expected to ignore the fact that one of them is currently chewing on a ceremonial fan. Bulls, particularly those chosen as incarnations of Apis, are given lavish treatment. Their selection is a matter of astrology, birthmarks, and divine consultation. Once chosen, the animal is housed in its own sacred compound, fed honey cakes, given a personal retinue of caretakers, and greeted each morning with songs. When it dies, the mourning period rivals that of human royalty. You once had to cancel a diplomatic meeting because the sacred bull developed a cough. and a group of chanting officials block the entrance to your court until it passed. Offerings for these creatures are constant: bowls of milk, loaves of bread, garlands of flowers. In one temple, it is customary to burn incense specifically designed for feline noses. In another, priests smear fish paste on stone altars to entice the holy crocodiles to bask in the correct orientation for an upcoming solstice. The animals do not care, they are animals, but the priests care deeply. And if a baboon refuses to sit for the full duration of a lunar hymn, it is interpreted as a signal from the stars that some poor official has failed to balance the barley rations in Lower Egypt. No one questions the expense. Shrines are built. Amulets are carved. Scribes record the dreams of oxen. You're once presented with a scroll that includes 27 divine omens, derived from the behaviour of a goose during high tide. You nod and try not to laugh. Everyone else is already bowing. The worst offence is to harm one of these creatures. Accidentally stepping on a sacred cat's tail in public has, on record, resulted in immediate beatings by onlookers. An intentional strike could trigger riots. A visiting dignitary once swatted at a temple ibis with a fan and spent the next 5 days barricaded in a guest chamber while priests demanded his sandals as reparations. The sandals were surrendered. The ibis was offered a bowl of dates. It did not appear interested. There is a zoo in the capital, not an entertainment zoo, a divine one, a collection of sacred beasts housed near temples and fed with ceremony. Tourists from other cities travel to see the crocodiles. They leave small bronze statues and papyrus notes requesting blessings for their harvests. One year, the baboons escaped. They climbed onto the roof of the temple, pulled down several banners, and rearranged the ceremonial bricks in a way that formed what was later declared a deeply spiritual shape. A month of celebrations followed. No one admitted the shape resembled a banana. Sacred insects are a thing. Scarabs are everywhere. They are not just symbols, they're actual beetles, bred and kept in specific temple gardens. You once had one land in your wine cup during a feast. You did not drink the wine. A priest retrieved the insect with tongs, whispered a blessing over it, and released it back into the reeds. The crowd applauded. You nodded solemnly while mentally crossing that cup off your list forever. It is exhausting. But it is non-negotiable. The animals are not just creatures, they are embodiments of order, living proof that the divine exists and can sneeze unexpectedly during a festival. You keep a distance, not because you are above them, but because getting bitten by something worshipped is difficult to recover from politically. There are days when your chambers smell like goat and papyrus, when a cat curls up on the official tax records and a crocodile sunbathes on the ferry ramp, when a bull refuses to be led into the blessing courtyard and a monkey steals a sacred wig from a temple acolyte. You're told these things mean something. You smile like you understand what. At night the palace quiets. The sacred cats settle onto cushions stuffed with feathers. The pools reflect the stars. Somewhere, a priest sings to a frog in the reeds. You close your eyes and try not to imagine how many of tomorrow's decisions will be based on what a goose chooses to look at during breakfast. Your dreams are not your own. They belong to the priesthood, to the scribes, to the temple astrologers who stare at the ceiling every night waiting for the stars to tell them if your subconscious had an acceptable evening. In ancient Egypt, dreams are not nonsense. They are divine communication, which means you do not get to wake up quietly, stretch, and roll over. You get to wake up to a man with a shaved head holding a wax tablet and asking politely whether your spirit floated through a field of geese, or if perhaps there was a crocodile involved. There are entire manuals written about dreams, hundreds of interpretations. If you dream of eating, it is a good omen. If you dream of your teeth falling out, someone is about to die. If you dream of being naked, it means honesty. Or it means you will lose money. Or it means someone nearby is hiding a sacred amulet. It depends on the priest. It also depends on whether the moon was in the right phase, and whether or not the temple cat hissed at the east wall that morning. You're expected to share everything, not just the highlights. You must describe the colour of the water, the direction of the wind, whether you were walking on earth or reeds or fire or something that looked like bread. The priest records all of this with the seriousness of someone chronicling the future of the Nile itself. You once described a dream where you dropped a bowl of figs. A week later, your grain tax was increased to honour the warning. You cannot lie, or rather, you can try, but you will be found out. The priests pray over your bed. They chant beside your chamber. They consult dream stones and watch the stars and listen to the fluttering of ibis wings before sunrise. If your story does not match their divination, they will know. And then you will be gently reminded that the gods are always listening, even when you sleep. Not all dreams are bad. Some are filled with lotus blossoms and calm rivers. These are interpreted as signs of a prosperous season. But even good dreams create work. If you dream of a field of wheat, you're expected to commission an offering to Ninutet. If you dream of a cow, Hathor must be honoured. If you dream of eating honey, a month of ritual purification is required to make your spirit light enough to benefit from sweetness. You're given scrolls to sign, orders to issue, ceremonies to attend. You begin to hope for dreamless nights. Sometimes your dreams are inconvenient. You once described seeing a large fish. The next morning, the Temple of Neith declared a week of sacred fasting to protect you from the unknowable depths. No one was allowed to serve fish. You were served leeks and dried bread for 6 days while fishermen tied protective knots into their nets and wept quietly over missed income. If you dream of falling, it means danger is approaching. If you dream of flying, it means divine elevation. If you dream of drowning, the entire court will change the direction of their morning procession to avoid imbalancing the sun's rising arc. You ask what happens if you dream of nothing. The priest stares at you and whispers something about the void. You stop asking. There are temples dedicated entirely to dream interpretation, sacred sleep chambers where petitioners lie on polished stone beds and hope for divine visions. Some drink sleep potions, others fast, others simply lie there and wait while the air thickens with incense and mosquito bites. You're expected to visit these temples annually, not to sleep, to appear, to show your favour, to approve renovations. You walk barefoot across cool tiles while people whisper that your presence alone can influence their next dream. Nightmares are the worst. If you wake in fear, the entire palace goes into ritual lockdown. The bed linens must be burned. The chamber must be washed with natron. The door must be resealed with symbols of protection. You're not allowed to speak to anyone until your voice has been blessed by 3 different priests using 3 different jars of oil, one of which smells unmistakably like boiled radish. You begin to censor yourself, not out loud, internally. You try to push thoughts away before sleep. You recite hymns. You imagine sacred rivers and orderly harvests. You try not to think of the crocodile that spoke in your dream last week, or the falcon that flew into your chest, or the feeling of sand pouring from your ears. You said nothing. The next day, someone brought you a scroll called The Warning of the Empty Sky. You did not open it. Dream interpreters are ranked. The most senior have their own robes, their own staff, their own side rooms in temples filled with reed mats and wall paintings, depicting famous dreams from past dynasties. They speak in riddles. They argue over hieroglyphs. They once debated for 4 days over whether your description of a blue goose meant joy or famine. They settled on both. You were told to eat cautiously and give thanks. Even your advisors get involved. If a dream is particularly vivid, it becomes court gossip. Your generals wonder if a vision of falling indicates military unrest. Your treasurers wonder if a dream of darkness means you will withhold spending. Your wives wonder whether the woman with lotus eyes in your dream was symbolic or specific. You pretend not to notice. You're offered perfume. You're offered wine. You're offered scrolls with helpful phrases for easing spiritual tension. None of it helps. There are days when you envy the farmers. Their dreams belong to themselves. They are not dissected, recorded, reinterpreted into public policy. No one wakes them up to ask whether the reeds were taller than usual, or whether the field they walked through smelled like frankincense or fish. They wake up, they stretch, they get on with it. You wake up and trigger a nationwide shift in barley storage procedures. At night you try to stay awake, just a little longer, just enough to slow the ritual. You stare at the ceiling, at the painted stars. You count them. You try to remember if your right eye twitched before sleep or after. You try not to think about the ibis again. Eventually sleep takes you. The dreams come. They always do. And before the incense burns out completely, the footsteps begin outside your door. Someone is coming to ask what you saw. The year is divided by rituals, not weeks, not seasons, but by how often you are required to parade through streets lined with sweating acolytes while carrying something too sacred to question and too heavy to hold. Each major festival comes with its own script, its own garments, and its own specific expectations for how much incense your lungs should be able to endure before collapsing politely into a throne cushion. There is no such thing as a short Egyptian festival. Some last a day, others a week. Some take the better part of a month and are only interrupted by fainting musicians or the occasional camel that refuses to walk in the designated sacred formation. You're not a guest of honor at these events. You're the central attraction. The physical embodiment of balance, fertility, victory, or whatever abstract concept has been assigned to you this time. The Feast of Opet begins at Karnak. It ends at Luxor. But between those two temples are hours of chanting, music, offerings, and elaborate public displays of harmony, performed in front of crowds large enough to require a team of scribes just to document how many onions are thrown in tribute. You're carried in a ceremonial bark, not an actual boat, a portable shrine, carved, painted, gold-plated, heavy enough that several of the carriers develop spiritual limps before the day is over. You must remain still, posed, holy, while sweating through layered linen under a golden canopy that reflects the sun directly into your eyes. The gods are carried beside you, their statues swaying on their own shrines. The people cheer, priests chant, dancers perform the same choreographed blessing 14 times in a row. At one point a goat appears wearing a crown. No one explains this. You nod. The crowd claps. You're expected to perform rituals along the route. Libations, declarations, the occasional symbolic smiting of an enemy carved in wax. You wave a sacred branch at a sycamore tree while a scribe documents the angle. You drink a symbolic sip of Nile water from a goblet shaped like a lotus. You pause in front of a bakery and break a ceremonial loaf in silence, while the baker weeps with joy or exhaustion. Possibly both. Once the procession ends, the offerings begin. Hundreds of baskets, bread, beer, onions, fish, dates, grapes, pomegranates, more bread, the same bread, new bread, bread shaped like gods, bread shaped like animals, bread shaped like other bread. You pretend to bless each one. You lose feeling in your left leg by the third altar. The festival of the valley honours the dead. You visit tombs, you light torches, you leave offerings. You spend a full day walking through necropolises while being recited to by priests who seem determined to include every possible epithet ever assigned to your lineage. You listen. You pretend to listen. You make mental notes about which sandals rub less when the terrain shifts from gravel to soft sand. There are 7 festivals, royal rejuvenation rituals. These are supposed to be symbolic rebirths, celebrations of long reigns. You run a ceremonial lap around a sacred courtyard to prove your divine vitality. Everyone cheers. You consider collapsing, but instead smile with the poise of someone who has not sprinted in over a decade. The priest declares you reborn. You're handed a pomegranate. The gods are not quiet during festivals. Statues are carried into public view. They are bathed, dressed, offered food, given perfume, surrounded by dancers and music and floral garlands. Some are placed on boats and floated down the Nile while priests chant from the banks. You follow in a separate vessel, pretending not to be aware that the divine bark is significantly more stable than yours and less prone to catching ceremonial cloth on passing reeds. The people love festivals. They cheer, they drink, they sing, they throw garlands and occasionally fish. Children chase temple cats dressed in miniature robes. Farmers travel for miles just to glimpse the golden canopy of Ra, or to smell the incense that has been declared blessed by a senior priest with a remarkably loud voice. You wave, you smile. You try to ignore the persistent breeze that keeps lifting your headdress slightly to the left. Not all festivals go smoothly. During one summer celebration, a troupe of dancers collapsed from heat exhaustion mid-performance. The priest declared it symbolic death and immediately began reciting the hymns for renewal. The crowd applauded. You joined in and quietly signalled for someone to bring water. The New Year festival is particularly demanding. It involves staying up through the night to witness the rising of Sirius, the star that marks the start of the Nile's inundation. You sit in silence while astronomer priests track the sky with tools that look suspiciously like glorified sticks. When the star appears, the crowd erupts. A jar is shattered. A bull is blessed. A chorus sings something about celestial alignment. You yawn, privately. Every festival results in official documentation. Scribes record each step. Artists carve scenes into temple walls. One day, someone will point to a mural showing you pouring sacred oil onto a shrine and say, "Look, what a glorious age." They will not know your feet were blistered, or that the oil splashed and stained your robe, or that you briefly forgot the god's name and had to cover it with a cough. By the end of each celebration, you're tired. You're hungry. You're slightly bruised from the chariot procession, and still trying to forget the awkward moment when the sacred ibis flew directly into your face. But you smile, because there is always another festival, another parade, another deeply symbolic reenactment of cosmic order involving fish, masks and yelling. And somewhere, another priest is preparing your lines for next week's sun ritual. A performance you will deliver while standing barefoot on a marble platform, holding a scepter shaped like a shepherd's crook in front of an audience of thousands. Half of them are chanting, the other half are just waiting to see if you fall. Smell is a social currency, not just a preference, a political tool, an olfactory announcement that you are holy, powerful, unblemished, and possibly on fire. Every person in your presence must inhale something symbolic, something divine, something floral and musky that clings to your skin long after the ritual is over and the flies have retreated. To smell bad is unthinkable. To smell neutral is suspicious. You must smell sacred. Your daily hygiene regimen includes being rubbed with at least 3 different scented oils. These are not light spritzes. They are full-body applications of thick, sticky mixtures made from crushed plants, resins, animal fats, and imported gums that were expensive enough to bankrupt smaller kingdoms. Myrrh, frankincense, sweet rush, moringa oil, cinnamon bark, labdanum, lotus, a few drops of imported cedar if the temple treasurer has not had another dream about famine and locked the storeroom again. These perfumes are applied generously and often, after bathing, before ceremonies, after meals, before sleep, sometimes during speeches if someone nearby starts perspiring visibly and a servant panics. You have stood motionless in the temple hall while a priest dabbed oil behind your ears with a strip of sacred linen that left your skin slightly raw and smelling like wet incense. Perfume is not just for humans. Statues are anointed. Letters are sealed with scented wax. Sacred wigs are smoked over sweet-smelling wood to ensure the fragrance lasts through multiple ceremonies. Scrolls carrying royal orders are sometimes perfumed so the command feels both official and pleasantly floral. You once received a tablet from a regional governor that reeked of garlic and goat. The priest who opened it immediately declared it heresy and suggested the messenger be ritually cleansed. The messenger was never seen again. The problem is that the climate does not care how sacred you smell. It strips the fragrance off your skin by mid-morning and leaves behind something closer to roasted barley and existential crisis. You perspire constantly, under your linen robe, beneath your gold collar, inside the wax-sealed wig that traps every molecule of your sacred scent and ferments it into something no amount of symbolism can excuse. The attendants respond by reapplying more oil, a fresh layer, then another. You become a walking balsam-glazed offering, The palace has scent zones, corridors where incense burns in copper dishes, entryways lined with myrrh blocks, meeting rooms where priestesses wave perfumed fans to keep the air holy and gently disorienting. You pass through these spaces trying not to inhale too deeply. Too much scent is seen as spiritually uplifting, but also a bit nauseating. One ambassador once fainted in the audience hall from an overzealous lotus mist. You stepped around him and offered no comment. Sweat is never acknowledged. It is sacred excretion. You're told it carries divine purification from within. Your robes are changed frequently. Your linens are discreetly replaced. Your attendants pretend not to see the wet patches forming beneath your arms, while you stand through another barley tax briefing. The scribes record your wisdom, not the scent radius. Deodorants do exist. Crushed natron mixed with ground carob or cinnamon paste. Sometimes tree resin or powdered lime. It is applied under the arms with small scoops carved from ivory. It stings slightly, then hardens, then flakes off during the midday heat. You once tried a new blend that included fermented honey and immediately attracted 3 bees and a priest who misread it as a fertility omen. He recited a blessing for 20 minutes while you tried not to sneeze. Perfume cones are another option. Small waxy pyramids worn on top of the head during festivals. As the heat rises, they melt slowly, releasing fragrance in a steady drip that runs through the hair, across the wig, and eventually into your eyes. You once blinked your way through an entire temple ceremony, with tears of sacred cassia streaming down your cheeks. The crowd interpreted this as a sign of divine empathy. You interpreted it as a poorly positioned cone. The royal chambers are saturated. Cedarwood smoke, sandalwood plumes, balsam-infused cloths draped over windows, temple incense made from a blend of 37 ingredients including juniper, pine resin, and a mysterious import labelled simply as night flower. It takes hours to air out a room, which is never done, because the air itself is considered part of the ritual. Visitors are expected to meet fragrance standards. Courtiers perfume their hands. Scribes dust their wigs with scented chalk. Even guards chew herbs before patrol. You once overheard 2 advisors debating whether your chief steward smelled more like blue lotus or spoiled coriander. The steward was replaced the following week. No one brought it up again. There are entire professions devoted to scent: perfumers, oil pressers, resin importers, incense mixers. Some recipes are temple-guarded secrets. Others are recorded in scrolls with precise instructions about the weight of a single petal and the correct order in which to heat the oil so that the gods are not insulted by an unbalanced aroma. You approved a festival blend once that included mint, cinnamon, and goat musk. The high priest said nothing but offered you a different blend the next day with significantly more myrrh. Sleep does not offer escape. Your sheets are perfumed. Your pillows are lightly dusted with sacred powder. Even the ceremonial bed platform is occasionally rubbed with resin, so that you do not dream in plain smells. You lie there, wrapped in scented linen, sweating gently into a system of beliefs that require you to smell like you have never once suffered. There is a point in the day when everything smells like incense. The walls, the scrolls, your skin. You begin to forget what the world was like before resin and lotus. You walk through the temple and wonder if you're breathing or just participating in an endless perfume ritual disguised as a government. No one questions it. No one opts out. Smell is power. To lose your scent would be to lose divine favour. You hold still as your wrist is anointed again. A drop of cinnamon oil, another of cedar. A final touch of lily that you're told was harvested during a lucky moon. You nod. You breathe in. You smell magnificent, and somehow worse than ever. Wearing clothes is a full-time job, not the act of dressing, the meaning behind it. Every fibre of linen wrapped around your body must communicate power, cleanliness, wealth, and balance with the cosmic order. It must reflect light properly. It must fold in the right direction. It must whisper against your skin like a hymn, and never once bunch in the wrong place, or suggest that you're sweating through your 5th ceremonial collar of the week. The linen is bleached to a brightness that could blind a lesser deity. Not because white is fashionable, but because white is purity. The gods are clean. The sun is clean. The king must be cleaner. Workers pound flax, strip it, soak it, weave it into thread, bleach it, weave it again. By the time it becomes royal clothing, it has gone through more purification rituals than your last 3 scribes combined. There are no simple tunics, no casual options. Every robe, sash and girdle must be draped with intent. The folds over your chest must lay flat to suggest moral clarity. The length must skim the ankles to signal dignity but never drag or imply sloth. Your kilt must be pleated sharply and folded precisely over the left hip, or it could be misread as a gesture of confusion during state rituals. You once turned too quickly during a blessing and your outer wrap flipped up slightly. The priest declared it an omen of spiritual misalignment. 3 days of hymns followed. The headdresses are worse. The nemes is iconic, striped, stiff, meant to frame your face like a cobra about to strike. It does not breathe. It does not bend. It is made of layers of starched linen stiffened with animal glue or wax, and once positioned, it cannot be removed without assistance or divine intervention. You sit for hours while it is adjusted, pulled, secured, lined with gold thread, and when the wind shifts even slightly, you must pretend nothing is happening while a servant leans in just enough to keep your dignity from folding in half. Jewellery is not decorative, it is mandatory. Gold collars, amulets, bracelets, anklets, rings shaped like gods, rings shaped like snakes, rings that are actually small scrolls listing your divine titles in microscopic hieroglyphs. These must be worn during court appearances, during rituals, during seasonal festivals, during audience meetings, even while eating. You once dropped a ring into a bowl of lentils and had to wait while the head priest fished it out with a piece of bread and declared the soup sanctified. Shoes are optional but symbolic. Leather sandals for formal events, reed sandals for temple visits, barefoot for funerals and purification rites. You're never just walking. You're demonstrating your alignment with the path of Ra through the celestial fields. A misstep is not just clumsy, it is a cosmic error. You tripped once during a procession, and 7 priests fainted simultaneously from spiritual whiplash. Even your underwear is ceremonial, a loincloth folded from pressed linen tied with knots that symbolize control and fertility. If tied incorrectly, it sends the wrong message to the gods, and possibly to the court scribes, who have been known to annotate dreams based on how tightly your waistband sits during morning ceremonies. You once sneezed while being dressed and dislodged the central knot. No one spoke of it, but the next day's offerings included twice the usual amount of pomegranate seeds. The climate is not interested in your dignity. It cooks you slowly under layers of symbolism. The linen traps heat. The gold amplifies it. The resin-scented body oil refuses to evaporate. You sit in council surrounded by advisors who appear fresh and clean only because they are wearing one layer of linen and standing near a priest holding a bowl of scented water. You smile. You shift slightly. You hear your tunic crackle from the starch. Laundry is a religious act. Your garments are not washed. They are sanctified, soaked in natron, beaten against flat stones, hung over reed frames to dry in the sun while hymns are chanted. A single misstep in the process can invite bad luck. One servant accidentally hung your sash upside down. He was reassigned to goat storage. You never asked what that meant. New garments are presented as gifts from the gods. You pretend to be surprised when a basket of pressed kilts is delivered by a priest, holding a scroll titled Seasonal Alignment of the Lower Linen. You nod. You thank the gods. You try not to ask why the shoulder wrap feels slightly more abrasive this year. Embroidery is reserved for the sacred, not just decoration, symbols of protection, stories, each stitch blessed, each thread dyed with pigments imported from far-off lands and mixed with oil, crushed beetle shell, or the occasional extract from something that may or may not still be legal under temple law. You once wore a robe embroidered with the full solar calendar. The court astrologer fainted. You were told this was a sign of renewal. You told them it was a sign the robe was too heavy. You have a wardrobe chamber, not a closet. A chamber, attended by scribes, everything catalogued, folded, labelled, selected based on the hour of the day and the current alignment of the moon. You're not allowed to dress yourself. You're not allowed to have opinions. You're allowed to stand still while 5 people silently wrap you in symbolic discomfort that leaves your shoulders rigid and your knees slightly numb. The people see you from a distance, tall, gleaming, divine. They do not see the itchy collar, the sweat pooling beneath your gold-plated pectoral, the faint imprint of a badly placed brooch pressing into your ribcage like a very respectful insect. You wave, you smile, you pray. The next breeze does not lift the sacred hem and reveal the emergency stitching applied by a panicked servant 10 minutes before sunrise. Some days, it is too much. The layers, the pressure, the implication that every movement of your robe changes the fate of the barley crop. You sit in your chamber, you breathe, you consider asking for a robe made of air. The priest knocks. He is holding another sash. Leadership is not about making decisions. It is about reviewing scrolls, piles of them, stacked on tables, rolled into bundles, tied with reeds, labelled with ink made from soot and ground minerals and barely legible once the temple cat has walked across it. Every order must be read, every reading must be witnessed, every witness must sign, the signature must be copied, the copy must be archived, the archive must be blessed, and then it can be lost. The kingdom functions on papyrus and people who never blink. Scribes are everywhere. Scribes to measure grain, scribes to track fish, scribes who count bricks, scribes who write other scribes' names into attendance scrolls just to make sure they have been properly accounted for. Some specialise in calendars, some in crop reports, some only write blessings for letters about linen deliveries. You once tried to simplify a delivery route between 2 temples. It required 4 new scrolls, a revised star chart, and a 30-minute ritual about riverwind patterns. Nothing happens quickly. To approve a new wall painting, you must receive the initial design, the sacred geometry diagram, the god alignment assessment, the paint pigment origin report, the plaster quality test, and the ceremonial colour blessing. Then you must sign a scroll stating you understand the consequences of reversing the order of the yellow and green bands on the left-hand ibis wing. You do not understand. You sign anyway. Seals are sacred, not just symbols. They are physical tools made of wood, stone, or faience, and pressed into clay with enough pressure to bind an agreement across time and space. Your seal is carved with your official name, which includes every title you have ever been given. Son of the Sun, Lord of the Crowns, Master of Balance, Guardian of Order, Controller of Seasonal Grain Rotation. You need a new scroll just to explain what your seal means. Officials carry their own seals. They use them to mark messages, to approve shipments, to identify whose job it is to look after a cart full of broken amphorae outside the granary. A missing seal is a minor disaster. A duplicate seal is a potential conspiracy. You once had an entire department reassigned because someone accidentally sealed a wine inventory using a livestock tally stamp. The wine was fine. The goats were offended. Numbers matter. So do signs. So do patterns. The bureaucracy believes in balance. 1 shipment of barley equals 1 scroll. 1 grain shortage equals 5 meetings. 1 unexpected bird sighting near a temple equals a halt in all administrative duties, until someone confirms whether the bird was sacred or merely lost. You once had to cancel a public appearance because an ibis nested on the ledger table, and no one was brave enough to move it. Taxation is a full-time operation, not money, goods, barley, fish, cloth, beer, cattle, honey, flax, garlic, even sandals. Everyone pays. Farmers, artisans, priests, temple musicians. A portion of everything flows into the state, and then back out, and then back in again because someone forgot to count the fish. There is an official called the Inspector of Fish Tallies. He carries 3 reed pens and wears a sash that smells like damp river mud. You once saw him arguing with a goose. Messages move slowly. There are no pigeons, no runners. There are couriers, men with scrolls strapped to their backs, paddling up and down the Nile or walking through dust storms to deliver news about wheat prices. They arrive sweaty, dusty, holding papyrus curled so tightly you need to flatten it under a sacred weight for an hour before you can even read the part about the mould outbreak in the western granaries. Some departments compete. The Department of Temple Offerings and the Department of Grain Distribution have not agreed on a harvest report in 5 years. They send you conflicting scrolls. One says the gods are pleased, the other says the gods are hungry. You offer a ceremonial onion to both sides and declare it resolved. It is not resolved. They double the scroll count next year. Legal matters are no better. Cases must be heard, not argued. Heard. Evidence includes dream reports, smell records, proximity to sacred objects. One man once accused another of stealing a loaf of festival bread based on how much his tunic smelled like roasted wheat. The scribe recorded the claim. The judge requested an incense cleansing. You were asked to approve a replacement loaf. The gods were thanked. The thief, if he existed, was never found. Every decision is a precedent. Every precedent must be recorded. You once altered the ceremony schedule by 1 hour because of heat. It created a cascade of scrolls outlining the proper ritual order for shade optimization. You're now technically required to approve all sun angle related adjustments in writing before noon. There is a department for that too. Occasionally papyrus runs low. This causes panic. Not because the kingdom lacks materials, but because switching to temporary scrolls made of leather or bark throws off the entire filing system. Temple archives become a mess of mismatched documents. Priests complain. Scribes weep. You approve an emergency expedition to harvest more papyrus reeds. It results in 2 boat accidents and 1 missing overseer. The reeds arrive. The scrolls resume. Sometimes the archives are audited, not for accuracy, for omens. A priest reviews a century-old grain ledger and declares the current rainfall pattern matches the 3rd cycle of the previous dynasty. This leads to more scrolls, revised planting orders, adjusted temple offerings. You're given a chart explaining how moonlight affects lentil yields. You nod. You never eat lentils again. There is no end, no escape, no day without paperwork disguised as ritual, disguised as divine will. You rise each morning not to rule, but to review, to recite, to listen, to press your seal into soft clay and wonder whether anyone still remembers what you actually wanted when you started this job. The sun sets, a courier arrives, a scribe unfolds a scroll, the incense is lit, you squint at the ink. It is a request for permission to open the last basket of emergency scroll ribbon. You blink, you nod. The gods are pleased. You begin the day the same way every pharaoh has for centuries, with existential dread. Not about war or drought or the endless burden of running a divine bureaucracy held together with mud bricks and goat hair. No, today your anxiety curls itself around your breakfast tray as your royal food taster begins to sniff a suspicious bowl of lentils. Not because it smells bad, but because that's how most of your predecessors went out. One mouthful too many of something a little too bitter, a little too fishy, a little too blessed by a political rival with access to crushed scorpion paste. Poisoning was the preferred hobby of anyone looking to climb the ancient Egyptian corporate ladder. It required no weapons, no army, no rebellion, just one disgruntled cook or an overripe fig. And so, your food taster was less of a servant and more of a human meat shield with a decent palate. He eats first, chews slowly, swallows reluctantly, and then waits in silence while everyone watches to see if he dies. Of course, not all poisons were swift. Some were subtle, drawn from fermented desert plants or mineral concoctions ground down with beer and bad intentions. They might take hours or days, which means your food taster was not a one-and-done affair. He followed you through every course, every snack, every suspiciously generous offering from a visiting dignitary who suddenly seemed a little too interested in your digestion. There was no testing lab, no royal forensics department, just trial and error, and mostly error. Some pharaohs employed multiple food tasters, partly as a security measure and partly as a cruel form of research. If 3 of them dropped dead after sampling the honey cakes, that was generally a red flag. You, however, keep it lean. 1 man, 1 stomach, 1 tragic salary. And yet, despite all this paranoia, the royal kitchens were not exactly a model of hygienic control. The same slaves who prepared your meals also shoveled out the latrines. Raw fish sat in baskets for days. Bread was often chewed by rats before it was chewed by you. The Nile water used for cooking was more bacteria than liquid. And don't forget the generous handfuls of natron salt and questionable spices added to everything to make it taste slightly less like foot. The fear of poisoning extended far beyond the kitchen. Your wine was suspect. Your ointments, your incense, even your bath oils had to be sniffed and dabbed and sometimes sampled, which meant you basically lived surrounded by a rotating cast of sacrificial interns, each of whom might be 1 lukewarm cucumber away from organ failure. Despite their grim role, food tasters were oddly respected. Not for their courage, but because they essentially lived in the same gilded prison as you. They dined beside you, dressed in white linen like tiny stressed-out pharaoh clones, and were trained in the subtle art of not flinching every time a new dish was served. It was a performance, a sacred ritual of false comfort. If the taster didn't keel over, the meal was declared safe. Not good, not tasty, just safe enough to delay your funeral by a few more hours. Naturally, this created a culinary environment best described as cautious. You ate the same meals over and over, not out of tradition, but because change was dangerous. Exotic delicacies from the south? No thank you. Strange dates from a rival province? Try again. Even common fare like onions and garlic became suspicious if delivered too eagerly. Every bite required trust, and there was very little of that to go around. Your kitchen staff was often made up of slaves, indentured servants, or gifted chefs from regions that weren't particularly thrilled to be part of your kingdom. Even the trusted ones aged out quickly. A taster who lived too long was seen as either too lucky or too immune. And someone immune to poison. That just sounded like someone waiting to use it on you. This paranoia didn't stay in the palace. It leaked into every festival and feast. Royal banquets were structured like obstacle courses, each platter carefully rotated, each jug of beer sampled in sequence, each roasted duck paraded like a suspect under torchlight. And if you happened to sneeze, half the room would panic. There were antidotes, allegedly. Strange powders made from crocodile gallbladders, fermented camel milk, or mashed lotus petals. Some priests swore by amulets. Others claimed divine prayers could reverse the symptoms. None of this actually worked. If you got poisoned, your options were to vomit, pray, and die in increasingly undignified stages. And yet, you still had to eat. You still had to pretend everything was fine. You had to smile at offerings and nod approvingly at foreign delicacies, while wondering if your last memory would be the taste of slightly off melon. Because starvation wasn't an option. You had to be seen eating. A god king who didn't eat was seen as weakened, vulnerable, ready to be replaced. In the end, it wasn't about enjoying your meals, it was about surviving them. And while your food taster quietly sweats through his 4th cup of possibly cursed beer, you politely nibble a piece of bread shaped like a scarab and hope the day's menu doesn't end with a sudden nosebleed, and the palace embalmer measuring your organs for resale. Now, speaking of things that made pharaonic life even worse than it already was, your royal wardrobe is next. And let's just say, divine fashion was less about comfort and more about heatstroke, accidental strangulation, and linen chafing in places linen was never meant to go. You do not get dressed like a normal human, you get constructed. Before your feet even touch the floor, attendants are already circling like linen-obsessed vultures, laying out a wardrobe that screams divine authority and whispers chafing. Every layer has meaning, every accessory has a purpose, every seam is designed to impress the gods, but none of it is designed for comfort, and it shows. Begin with the linen, always the linen. Egypt's most luxurious fabric is, in reality, a scratchy, sheer punishment that wrinkles the second you breathe near it. The base layer is light, yes, but you will be wrapped in several of them. Tunics, kilts, sashes, layer after layer of bleached symbolism until you feel like a sacrificial onion. And despite the oppressive heat, there's no such thing as casual wear. Your wardrobe is ceremonial. Even your underwear is embroidered with tiny falcons. Now comes the jewellery, which weighs roughly as much as a Nile crocodile's opinion. Gold pectorals slam against your chest like miniature battering rams. Anklets rattle as if your knees are haunted. Rings adorn every finger, not because you like them, but because symbolism demands it. Each one proclaims fertility, war, eternity, or cosmic power. None of them announce practicality. Your neck is draped in broad collars layered with beads, gemstones, and the kind of artistic overcompensation that screams, "This is what happens when you don't have zippers." Then there's the eyeliner. Kohl, applied daily with the intensity of a battlefield ritual. It was meant to ward off evil spirits and reduce sun glare, but in practice it's just another chance to poke yourself in the eye while pretending it's for religious reasons, and you can't skip it. No matter how sweaty, sick, or sleep-deprived, a pharaoh without eyeliner is basically a naked embarrassment to the gods. The headdress is the final insult. Tall, heavy, and impossibly stiff, it serves no practical purpose except to remind everyone that your scalp does not belong to you. Whether you're wearing the striped nemes, the ceremonial crown, or a hybrid of both because two symbols are better than one, you'll spend your day craning your neck like a stiff-necked deity in physical therapy. And heaven help you if the cobra on your brow gets knocked out of place. That thing isn't just decoration, it's the embodiment of divine protection, and having it lopsided is about as spiritually embarrassing as trailing toilet papyrus out of your sandals. Speaking of sandals, they're the only part of your outfit remotely breathable, and even they are embroidered with symbols of domination. Some feature images of your enemies, so every step is a metaphorical stomp on your foes. Nice in theory. In practice, it means delicate reed soles covered in squashed faces that wear down and need replacing often. You'll go through more sandals than most people go through entire relationships. And what do you do once you're fully adorned in 40 pounds of symbolic fabric and metal? Mostly stand. Stand in the sun. Stand before the people. Stand in processions. And stand in temples. You're a living statue expected to exude eternal authority, while trying not to faint from dehydration. If you sit, it must be on a throne that doubles as an orthopedic death trap. If you lie down, it's only after being undressed by 6 attendants who have memorized the order in which your garments must be removed lest they accidentally offend Horus with an improperly handled armband. In case you were wondering, none of this ever changes. Fashion cycles don't exist in ancient Egypt. What you wear at 25 is what you'll wear at 60. Trends aren't allowed to evolve because everything is already divine. There's no room for innovation when your wardrobe is set by sacred tradition and millennia of rigid style rules. You sweat, you sparkle, you symbolize. Every strand of linen is a scroll, every piece of gold a proclamation. The gods are watching, the priests are judging, and your collarbone is starting to blister under an enamelled falcon disc. There is no casual Friday for the living god, only layers of boiling reverence and tightly cinched symbolism. And while your subjects are mostly half naked in the sun, slathering themselves with castor oil and trying not to pass out, you're inside a palace, encased in sacred fabric and sweating like a divine roast duck, smiling faintly because smiling is part of the ritual, and your entire face is starting to melt. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. New linen, same gods, slightly more eyeliner. Your chariot looks magnificent from a distance. Golden trim, intricate carvings, ostrich feather accents that scream both speed and overcompensation. To the untrained eye, it glides like a divine vessel across the sand. To your inner thighs, it is a mobile cheese grater. The suspension is a lie. There is no suspension, just a flat wooden platform perched over 2 wheels and 1 very committed horse. That horse, by the way, is sacred in name only. In practice, it's cranky, overheated and fueled by barley mash and spite. You climb aboard with the help of 2 servants because pharaonic balance is more ceremonial than functional. The moment you stand, the platform dips and wobbles like a drunken table at a royal feast. You grip the reins, which are made from leather so stiff it feels like trying to steer a bull using ancient sandals, and off you go, bouncing down a dusty path that hasn't seen a paving stone since the reign of the last guy who died in this chariot. Every pebble, every root, every undignified clunk translates directly into your knees, your back, and occasionally your royal dignity. Chariots were the elite's answer to battlefield mobility, but they weren't exactly practical. Early Egyptian chariots evolved from Canaanite designs, essentially repurposed carts for upper-class speed junkies. They were fast, yes, but not stable. The wheels were spoked, the frame was light, and the whole contraption was built for racing across firm ground, not navigating the soft sand or temple roads you insist on showing off down. You may look heroic to the crowds, but your spine is filing a formal complaint with every bump. The bronze bits clink and rattle with ceremonial elegance, masking the very real fact that the axle hasn't been oiled in a week. It's a miracle the whole thing hasn't buckled under the weight of your excessively layered regalia. And while you think you're cutting an imposing figure, the dust cloud you're trailing behind is settling like divine ash on your freshly applied eyeliner. This would all be manageable if the weather weren't trying to set you on fire. Egyptian summers are less warm and more oven. Riding a chariot at noon turns your golden headdress into a stovetop burner. The sun reflects off every surface, including your own robes, which act like a heat-retaining toga of doom. You start to hallucinate halfway through your ceremonial circuit. Was that the god Horus, or just another heat mirage shaped like disappointment? You try waving to your people, but one hand on the reins is already a risk, and both hands off would require divine intervention. Instead, you manage a series of nods that feel regal on the inside but probably look like you're suffering a slow cranial collapse. Your driver, a palace eunuch who drew the short straw this morning, mutters something about hip pain and the axle alignment, which you ignore in favour of focusing on not falling face first into the Nile. Chariots weren't for long journeys, they were for statements. The ancient pharaohs didn't use them for commuting. They used them to roll up to battles, to ceremonies, to very dramatic parades where everyone was too afraid to question whether this thing was more of a death trap than a status symbol. You may look divine, but deep down, you're one speed bump away from becoming a royal projectile. Later, when you finally dismount with the grace of a collapsing obelisk, the crowd erupts in polite applause. You smile through your sunburn, bow slightly, and limp back toward the palace with thighs that will remember this day for weeks. There are herbs for that. Somewhere. Probably guarded by a scribe with a complex filing system and a superiority complex. And as you sit down to recover, a court official informs you there's another chariot demonstration scheduled at dawn. Fantastic. That gives your joints roughly 9 hours to stop making snapping noises like a papyrus fire. But hey, no one said divine rule would be ergonomic. You close your eyes and imagine a world where rulers are carried in palanquins with silk cushions and snacks. Then you open them to the reality of one more parade route and a fresh set of bruises, all in the name of majesty, of course, or something equally poetic and vaguely painful. If you lived like a god on earth, you'd assume you got to eat like one too. But the pharaoh's royal menu wasn't just rich, it was a minefield of slow-acting digestive sabotage. Every bite, every sip, and every sweet fig came with its own hazard, because ancient luxury had a nasty habit of doubling as unintentional poison. The food was lavish, yes, but so was the bacteria count. Bread, a staple so revered it bordered on religious, was frequently ground with bits of sand thanks to the stone tools used to make flour. So you weren't just eating wheat, you were eating grit, gravel, and the occasional crunchy reminder that dentistry wouldn't be invented for another 3 millennia. Slowly, those precious royal molars ground down like sandstone cliffs in a windstorm, leaving exposed nerves and infections. Chewing hurt. Not chewing meant starving. And forget soft food. Even porridge had texture. The wine, supposedly the nectar of the elite, came aged with a side of botulism risk. Amphorae, those lovely ceramic jars, were often sealed with natural resins that could trap bacteria, along with the bouquet of fermented grapes. Add a few weeks of Egyptian heat, and you were playing gastrointestinal roulette with every goblet. Still, you drank it, because water was often worse. Nile water was like the ancient version of a dare, teeming with parasites, fecal contaminants, and the mysterious floaters of a civilization that had yet to invent modern sanitation. It was essentially a clear broth of disease. So yes, you drank wine. Sometimes you even pretended it tasted good. And on feast days, you washed it all down with date beer, which was like drinking someone's expired attempt at kombucha, only chunkier. The fruits looked glorious in those tomb paintings. In real life, they were a sugar-soaked breeding ground for wasps and worms. You might bite into a pomegranate and find it already occupied. Figs hid larvae. Dates came with ants, but refusing to eat them made you look ungrateful to the gods. You were expected to enjoy your sacred rot with dignity. And let's not forget honey. It was prized, offered to deities, and used in burial rituals. It was also used to cover wounds and lure flies away from more valuable body parts. Occasionally it ended up back in the pantry. The ancient food cycle was disturbingly circular. Meat was a luxury, and like all luxuries it came with risk. Spoilage was common. You could slap on a spice rub and pretend it wasn't rotting, but your intestines would know the truth. There were no cold storage rooms. Salting helped, smoking helped, but sometimes meat just aged like regret. Yet when it was presented at a festival or ritual banquet, you had to eat it, even if it jiggled in ways meat shouldn't jiggle. Royal chefs didn't take requests. If it came from a sacred cow, you ate the sacred cow. Even the cosmetics were toxic. You wore coal around your eyes, which doubled as sunscreen and spiritual armour, but it was made with lead and copper. It helped keep the sun's glare and evil spirits away. It also helped your blood slowly fill with heavy metals. Lip stains used red ochre and fat. The fat went rancid. The ochre occasionally contained iron oxides that irritated the skin. Your lips might be kissable in theory, but they itched like a curse. You couldn't complain. Looking miserable while looking fabulous was part of the job. Royal medicines were a dice roll with camel dung odds. Treatments included crocodile dung for contraception, honey mixed with lizard blood for infections, and incantations for literally everything else. If you had a fever, you got a poultice. If that didn't work, you got more poultices. And if that failed, it was probably because a demon had taken up residence in your liver, so a priest came and yelled at it while burning incense. No one ever thought to ask why the incense also made you nauseous. You were surrounded by incense, by the way, at meals, during ceremonies, even while bathing. It masked the smells of sweat, rot, and sanctified mildew. But inhaling resin smoke all day did wonders for your lungs. Not good wonders. The smoky chambers of royal life gave your sinuses the texture of dried papyrus. Your cough wasn't divine, it was just chronic. But if you hacked too loudly, someone might assume you were cursed, and curses were contagious. So you coughed into your gold-threaded sleeve and pretended it was allergies. Every day you were slowly embalming yourself from the inside out. The bread wore down your teeth, the wine pickled your liver, the cosmetics infused your skin with elemental toxicity, and the medical treatments insulted your internal organs with a parade of wishful thinking and lizard-based ointments. This wasn't just the price of power. This was the subscription fee for existing in a society that mistook decay for divinity. And through it all you smiled, because the scribes were watching, the priests were chanting, and the gods were apparently obsessed with how well you handled indigestion. So you adjusted your golden headdress, waved to the crowd, and tried not to vomit down your jewel-encrusted pectoral. It is far too easy to romanticize the life of a pharaoh when you forget that ancient Egypt was basically one very long episode of accidental self-destruction through decorative cosmetics, medical guesswork, and a disturbing tendency to store things in lead. By now you have had your skin soaked in oils that glow but clog every pore, your back cracked by servants who claim to be healers, and your lungs flooded with temple incense thick enough to mummify your thoughts mid-sentence. But none of this compares to the truly elegant way ancient Egypt slowly poisoned its own elite. It was not done through assassination or some political plot. No, the real enemy was Bronze Age chemistry, aesthetic ambition, and a royal tradition of smearing, sniffing, and swallowing things no sane modern pharmacist would ever allow anywhere near a living body. Cosmetics were the first offenders. Every morning began with a full facial smear of green malachite or black coal, ground down into pastes and applied around the eyes. Not for fashion, mind you, but for divine protection, and a slightly less burning stare into the desert sun. Unfortunately, malachite is copper-based, and coal sometimes contained galena, which is lead sulfide. You could technically call it sunscreen, but only if your sunscreen today also comes with bonus neurotoxicity. And yes, some historians believe this eyeliner might have helped with eye infections by encouraging nitric oxide production. But that does not cancel out the fact that you are drawing delicate lines of trace heavy metals directly onto your sweat glands, every day, forever. Next comes the delightful art of aroma. Being a god king apparently meant smelling like a roasted fruit basket left in the sun. Your perfumes contained myrrh, frankincense, cinnamon bark, and often a mysterious paste called kaifi, which was aged for weeks and made of wine, honey, raisins, and resin. It was burned and breathed in during temple rituals, but also rubbed onto skin, hair, and anything the pharaoh sat on. And if it gave you headaches or hallucinations, well, that was just the gods trying to tell you something. Your own lungs became incense burners, your sinuses clogged with sacred smoke, and your furniture turned into a sticky shrine to every botanical nightmare Egypt could grind up and distill. Temple rituals did not just overwhelm your spirit, they marinated your respiratory system. Medicines were no better. You were fed crushed beetles, mouldy bread, and occasional spoonfuls of crocodile dung mixed with honey. The theory was simple. Bad things inside you must be driven out, and if the treatment also made you vomit uncontrollably or lose consciousness, then congratulations, the gods were purging you. Egyptian medicine had moments of brilliance, like honey as an antibacterial dressing, or the use of willow bark for pain relief. But it also insisted on inserting garlic up the nose to treat headaches, and believed that mixing clay with sour beer was an acceptable gastrointestinal cleanse. If it foamed and fizzed, it was medicine. If it smelled bad enough to kill a fly, it was divine. Then there were the materials used in palace life. Lead was abundant and quietly lethal. It lined water vessels, glazed pottery, and might even have been used in some pigment dyes. Mercury was known, though not widely used, but other minerals like antimony and arsenic snuck into both beauty and ritual products. You drank from vessels laced with lead, sat on thrones painted with toxins, and occasionally enjoyed a relaxing bath in water that had simmered in a sunlit, heavy metal-lined basin. It was not fast poisoning. It was the slow, polite, regal decline of cognitive function, kidney failure, and chronic fatigue. The animals around you were also soaked in questionable chemistry. Sacred cats were perfumed, embalmed birds were dusted with resins that could spark allergic reactions, and your own pet baboons may have been fed ceremonial treats preserved in wine or honeyed alcohol. There were even cosmetic pastes made with bits of bone, bits of ash, and possibly bits of things no one recorded because the recipe was sacred. And as Pharaoh, you received the strongest doses, the highest concentrations, because obviously the living god needs the purest form of brain-numbing eyeliner and the densest incense to ensure constant communion with the divine. No one told you the divine would arrive through dizziness, tremors, and persistent confusion. Food did not escape the toxic love either. While much of your diet was bread, beer, figs, and roasted meats, some of the additives used for preservation or ceremonial prep may have leached strange chemicals into the food. Ash from burnt herbs, sand blown into the flour, or the occasional inclusion of ancient mineral salt could introduce a delightful spectrum of abrasives and contaminants into your digestive tract. Add to that the inevitable fungal growth on stored grain, and you're basically hosting a silent banquet of gut parasites and slow-motion poisoning. Even death could not save you. Upon dying, your body would be embalmed with natron salts, resin-soaked linens, and sometimes painted with toxic mineral pigments. Your tomb was a sealed, heavy metal-scented chamber of chemical instability. In a way, the afterlife was just a continuation of the poisoning, with a bit more wrapping. The most astonishing part is that many of these substances were considered sacred, divine, or medicinal. They were gifts from the gods. They were the good stuff, and so you layered them on, breathed them in, swallowed them by the spoonful, and carried their effects into both your ruling years and your grave. And that was just the baseline for Egyptian royalty. The truly unlucky ones added snake venom, scorpion stings, or hallucinogenic blue lotus wine to the mix, all in pursuit of power, clarity, or divine vision. In reality, it was more often a powerful headache and a tendency to hallucinate that your own furniture was whispering prophecies. But at least you smelled nice. And now, with your bloodstream a shrine to questionable decisions, it is time to move forward into the next absurdity of ancient rule, where the only thing more dangerous than palace chemistry is what happens when you try to clean it up. It starts with a frog. A toad, technically. Its dried body has been stuffed into a linen pouch, tied with a string made from sinew, and hung quietly above the doorway to the royal bedroom. It is not for decoration. It is there to ward off demons, protect the pharaoh's K, and hopefully keep the nightmares from turning prophetic. Welcome to another night of ancient Egyptian sleep hygiene, where rest was less about counting sheep and more about surviving the metaphysical apocalypse waiting in your dreams. For all the golden splendour and public shows of divinity, the pharaoh's nights were riddled with superstition and metaphysical anxiety. Sleep was not a peaceful retreat. It was an unguarded liminal state where spirits wandered, ghosts returned, and one's soul might accidentally flee the body altogether. This was not metaphorical. Ancient Egyptians genuinely believed the Bey, or the personality soul, could wander off during sleep and might forget to return unless proper magical measures were taken. So every night, a cocktail of spells, amulets, and quietly whispered incantations became part of the pharaoh's bedtime routine. Some rulers even commissioned custom lullabies from temple priests that were less lullaby and more spiritual insurance policy against possession by malicious entities with names so unpronounceable they were written in backwards hieroglyphs. The bed itself was carved from wood and shaped like a lion, its paws clawed forward in a show of power that conveniently doubled as ankle bruises in the dark. The mattress, not a mattress. Woven reeds laid over leather straps provided all the cushion one could hope for before waking up with vertebrae arranged like a poorly shuffled deck of Senate cards. And the pillow, if one could call it that, was a carved stone headrest meant to keep the neck elevated so as not to invite evil spirits to enter through the ears. Naturally, this ensured you would never sleep on your side again, unless you wanted to risk demonic auditory intrusions. Mosquitoes did not care about your royal status. Neither did fleas, lice, or the occasional opportunistic rat that saw your golden bedchamber as a shortcut to a leftover tray of honeycakes. And yet the worst threat to sleep wasn't even physical. It was the dreams themselves. Entire dream manuals were compiled to interpret the meaning of nocturnal visions. Dreamed of losing your teeth? Bad omen. Dreamed of falling? Worse omen. Dreamed of pigs eating your sandals? That might mean your enemies are conspiring, or maybe just that you went heavy on the fig beer before bed. Dream interpretation wasn't casual pillow talk. It was a state concern. Some pharaohs employed full-time dream readers whose sole job was to decode the subconscious mutterings of your ba like divine sleep therapists with a scroll addiction. Before bed, one might burn myrrh to purify the room, drink an herbal sedative made from mandrake and lotus, and be anointed with oils infused with anti-demonic properties. The result was not so much sleep, as it was a chemically sedated truce with the spirit world. No less than half a dozen deities were invoked in a standard royal bedtime prayer. If any of them were grumpy, the pharaoh might wake up paralysed, haunted, or simply very, very dead. Not to mention the common fear of the dead themselves. Pharaohs were obsessed with not being visited by angry ancestors. This led to a cultural phenomenon known as the letters to the dead, where one would write polite notes to deceased relatives asking them not to interfere with dreams or crop yields. Some particularly anxious rulers went so far as to sleep inside miniature shrines, surrounded on all four sides by protective spells carved into stone walls. This did create the unfortunate side effect of transforming your bedchamber into something resembling your future tomb, which is never comforting. Others commissioned wax figurines of hostile spirits to be ritually burned at dusk, which smelled a lot like paranoia and beeswax. On particularly unlucky nights, one might find a priest scribbling frantically onto ostraca outside the royal bedroom, trying to finish a last-minute curse repellent before the Pharaoh's bay took off like a spooked ibis. And still, despite all this metaphysical fortification, you would lie there, staring at the cracked ceiling mural of Nut, goddess of the sky, wondering whether the twitch in your left leg was just a cramp or a sign of imminent spiritual dismemberment. Meanwhile, your wife has already fallen asleep wearing 7 amulets, 3 bracelets blessed by temple oracles, and a rather aggressive perfume made from crocodile fat and lavender. She snores softly. She will probably survive the night. You, however, are still trying to remember whether the frog at the door was supposed to face inside or out. And somehow, against all odds and intestinal betrayals, you've made it through the royal gauntlet of ancient misery. From cursed wigs to ceremonial constipation, your pharaonic adventure has finally reached its final wheezing breath. Congratulations, you're now officially too tired to be embalmed. Or maybe that was the point. If you enjoyed this slow descent into pyramid-scented suffering, please give it a like. It really helps, unlike crocodile-shaped amulets, which sadly do nothing for the algorithm. And if you're still awake, I'd love to hear what absurd slice of history you'd like us to cover next. Drop a comment below with your idea, or just let me know what time it is where you're listening from. I love seeing where our sleepy little kingdom stretches across the world. And hey, don't forget to check out the other videos on the channel. We've got more tales of historical horror, revolting romance, questionable hygiene, and all the bedtime brain itch you didn't know you needed. Now close your eyes, float gently down the Nile of dreams, and remember, ruling ancient Egypt might have come with gold and glory, but also scorpions, sunburns, and diarrhea in a linen skirt. Good night, Pharaoh. You earned your nap.